So a brief introduction to our panel before we get stuck in. We have Johan Falk, the CEO and co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. A little wave. Hi. We have Katarina Björk, who's the Chief Climate Policy Officer at Decarbonising. We have Lars Lundstrom, who's the Head of Product Sustainability at H2 Green Steel. We have Ramiro Fernandez, who is the Campaigns Director of the Climate Champions team. We have Mats Pellback-Sharp, who is the Head of Sustainability at Ericsson. And we have Jenny Cato, the Senior Vice President, Global Head of Public Affairs and Partnerships at Scania. Thank you so much for being with us today. So I'm going to ask Jenny and Ramiro to head down to the beautiful first row, as this session is quite unique in that we're actually splitting it into two 45-minute sessions with, I promise you, a mini stretch break in between. So Jan, I'm going to turn over to you and ask you what ERI has done already on transition plans, and to just walk us through, for those who might not be familiar, on what a transition plan is.
Thank you, and great to be here again at this fantastic place. So why transition plans? It is indeed a quite hot topic, even if the term isn't that hot as far as I see it. But there are a number of reasons for that. We are, of course, beyond target setting and pledges. I mean, that's basics. It's set by science. We basically need to follow a trajectory, what we say the carbon law, halving emissions about at least every 10 years. So it's all about setting plans, taking action, and do and implement and show results. So that is really important. That's the first point. We will see legal requirements on transition plans. So all companies will actually have to step up. This will take quite some time. I think it's a serious risk for companies who haven't started their work already, because it will take a serious time to do this work. So that's really a clear message to every company. You need to start now, otherwise it's a serious risk for you as a company. As you mentioned, the Secretary General has asked for credible transition plans. So we, from the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, we have helped to nominate something like 10, 15 of some of the world-leading companies the last 2-3 months. Some of them are here who have provided their transition plans to the Secretary General, and will be at the event tomorrow as well to further discuss what is required. We think this is a really good driver for action and for actually integrating climate and nature in the business plans. So it is a good driver for that as far as we see it. I also like to add how we look upon transition plans. There is a lot of practices being developed, and I think we will share some experiences here from different directions. So we will also plan to sort of share tools and best practices over time, and try also to collaborate with other organizations so we avoid too much of fragmentation. But if you think about it, the starting point should be, well, try to imagine the net zero world for your value chain. What is really the North Star, where you're heading? And the transition plan would basically be to understand the gap where you are and how you will come to that point with intermediate targets. So that is how we need to take it next as far as we see it. I would also like to mention that for transition plans, we have at least two types of companies. Either you are an established company in a value chain which is not aligned with 1.5. So you basically need to transform your business over a period of time. So if you're a transformative company, that's what we call it. The other type of company would be what we call a disruptive company, starting with climate solutions immediately, like H2 Green Steel, which primarily need to focusing on scaling up their solutions exponentially, but do that in a sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johan. Very helpful context, and I think leads us perfectly into our wonderful panel. So to each of you, could you briefly present what your company does and speak briefly to your transition plan? So starting with Lars.
Thank you all, and thank you, Johan. Maybe I should say we see ourselves as enablers, not disruptors. We have discussed this before, but we want to enable an entire industry to change. I'm Lars Lundstrom, and I'm Head of Product Sustainability at H2 Green Steel. It's a pleasure to be back in New York. It's a pleasure to be back at Solutions House. And it's extra exciting today because we announced today that we are joining the ERI. As I think the first manufacturing company being a climate solution provider. And being first is not so important for me, but that's the headline of the news today. So what is then H2 Green Steel? We are a startup and we are establishing a new mill for creating green steel in the northern part of Sweden, in Northern Europe. And this will be based on hydrogen and direct reduction of iron and then electric steel making. We will make about 5 million tons, which is doubling the Swedish capacity, but it's a very, very small amount of the global production of steel. But the trick with our steel is that it has a very low carbon footprint, between 95 and 195 kilos per ton compared to 2 tons per ton for traditional steel. So we work with a 95% reduction compared to traditional steel when we start. And the trick with being a startup is that we design the mill and the product first, and then we go out now and we have actually pre-sold our product. And based on this pre-sale, we can actually also finance, and we have raised now almost 6 billion euros for building the first mill. And then we can continue to build and start to deliver in 2025. So it's a very, very intense timescale. I've been around for a little bit more than 2 years, but it's happening a lot, and we can come back to that. Our transition plans, very briefly, we start at a quite low level. We start with 95% reduction, and then we aim at becoming truly net zero no later than 2040. And then we talk about scope 1, 2, and upstream 3. And upstream 3 is the tricky part for us. Then we have to work with our suppliers. Net zero based on gross reductions mainly. We might need to do some offsetting on the margin. We also want to halve our production intensity by 2035. So going from 130 kilos to half of that by 2035, which is our trajectory for the medium term. But the most thing, and I think we will come back to that in a later question, is probably not us taking out the last kilos year by year. It is also important, but the most important for us is actually to be able to scale this so we can enable this industry to actually make the transformation that is so much needed. It's 3.5 billion tons of CO2 emitted by the steel industry every year. So that will probably be the most important for us, as Johan also mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lars. A very interesting perspective on a very hard to abate sector. So thank you. Katarina, same question to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. So nice to be here and thank you for the invitation. Great to be in New York. So my name is Katarina Björk. I'm with Doconomy, Chief Climate Policy Officer, and that means I do a lot of things. We are also a startup. We sometimes call ourselves a scale-up. We mean we are about 100 people. Based in Stockholm, in Sweden, but have our business globally. We're present at 40 markets. And what do we do? Well, we produce digital products that enable the many, we say, mostly individuals, but also corporates, to understand, measure and understand, and be able to activate and take action on their carbon and water footprints. So think about the first idea was to connect your purchases on a credit card to your carbon footprint and water footprint. And the idea was to put a carbon limit on the credit card. We never did that, but actually now, a few years after, banks are asking for it. Shouldn't we enable our consumers and corporates to actually put a carbon limit on their purchases? So we do that. We have several products. We have one for individuals, one for corporates. We have a lifestyle calculator together with the UNFCCC Secretariat to understand how does your lifestyle impact the society and water and carbon footprints. And I think, we have a high ambition. We want to increase climate literacy. We see it as a human and consumer right to understand the footprint, as well as you understand the financials and the weather forecast. You should understand what impact can you have and what positive impact could you contribute to. As we are a growing company, we have a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. We grow from 25 people when I started until up to 100 people, and that comes with a lot of new processes, structures, etc., which create demands on how we work with ourselves. Looking at the transition plan, it's mostly in scope 3 as we grow. So that's where we have our challenges. We travel, business travel and purchases of goods and services is our largest footprint. And to do that, to grow the business without traveling, whereas our markets are mostly outside of Sweden, and we need some of our people to sometimes come and visit and meet up, that is our largest challenges. But we work very thoroughly with that. We set a budget cap on business travels for 2023. Our ambition is to reach net zero by 2040 and to reduce our emissions by 50% until 2030.
Thank you so much, Katarina. Thank you for walking us through that fantastic scale up. Mats, I'll come to you with the same question.
Thank you for having me. So Mats Helbekshar, Head of Sustainability at Ericsson. And Ericsson is the world's oldest startup, as I'm sitting here with other startups now. 140 years old. We reinvent ourselves all the time, and it's largely thanks to Ericsson that you have your smartphone and that we managed COVID in such a good way. To be honest, because we wouldn't have made this crisis without connectivity and digitalization. No chance. And I think that is the golden star for us going forward. We should really use digitalization and take the learnings from that and bring that back in. And that has been missed so much in the whole transition plans globally. I think it's fantastic with green steel and so on. But it will take time to build the hard-to-abate sectors. But if we do things now with digitalization, we can take down emissions now, and that will buy us some time because the budget is limited and fixed. So I think we missed that opportunity by only focusing on the hard-to-abate. So that's sort of, we presented the report already 2015 when the Paris Agreement was signed and the SDGs were taken, that digitalization is an accelerated path to reaching the goals. And it's so funny because we were alone at that time. But now, during the weekend on the SDG Summit, there was a digital day. So now this is really moving up and taking momentum, the understanding of how important that is. So transition plans. We didn't have a transition plan 1 month ago, but we submitted one 3 weeks ago. And the reason for being able to do that was that we were doing everything. So it was more collecting everything that we were doing and driving it. And we have been, already when we took the net zero targets back in 2020 with our executive team, our CEO said, I don't want to leave a legacy where the next CEO has to take over something that is not ready to go on with. So he said, let's not focus on 2040, which is our net zero target. Let's focus on 2030 and 2025. Let's do things now. And that is really our transition plan. So we had the targets, we had the strategy, we had the action plans, and we pulled that together in a very short time to sort of. And that was a really good exercise, I must say. It was super good for us to sort of get that collection, that overview, and realizing how much work this is for a company. We are 100,000 people in 150 countries, selling to 180 countries where we have products. So, I mean, when I meet UNICEF, they say, you're the only company that have more offices than we have. So we are a truly global company providing this everywhere in the world. And I think for us, the transition plan was a fantastic exercise to pull things together, understand the big scope that we have, all the tasks that we have to do, and then also getting sort of, in a way, we could start coordinate a little bit. So we will continue to work with it, definitely. It was a really good exercise. But if we wouldn't have had all the plans, all the actions, all the things ongoing, we wouldn't have sort of been able to do it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mats. And actually, I'll come straight back to you with a question because you talked about how you gathered pieces of the transition plan from across your company. I'm curious, at what level of the company or within what department should the transition plan really be worked on, and what was this like for Ericsson?
Well, as I said, pulling it together was done by my team, more or less, and But the decision on our targets is by, as I said, our CEO, our executive team, and our board. And that is where we need to sort of set that. And that includes then, so it's not targets for us, as I said. 2025 is very, very close. So we are doing things now. So that is in the business areas, in the market areas, and all that is sort of integrated into the business in a really good way. But it has to be on sort of executive level and board level if you want to make sure that it's integrated into the business. So for us, it's more about embedding 90% of our value chain emissions come from the products when they are used. So the energy consumption of our products, 10% come from the upstream supply chain. If you take an iPhone or a device, it's the opposite. Then you have 90% in the supply chain, 10% in the user phase. So your transition plan has to sort of realize, and you have to understand, where do we have our emissions, where do we do things. So for us, energy performance of our products, energy consumption, and also in these days, in the energy crisis in Europe and in other places, we really need to sort of focus on the energy. So that is one of the areas. And then we realized that our industry, the ICT sector, the digital sector in total, uses around 4% of global electricity, but are commissioning 45% of all PPAs, all power purchase agreements, all commissioning of new renewable energy. So if you use 4% and buy 45%, then you're really driving the whole renewable sector. So we realized that, okay, now these emissions are going down because our customers are pretty forward-leaning, and we are as well. So then we need to focus on supply chain even more, because that's the next thing. So that is, understanding that in a good way, it becomes a truly embedded part of all the different parts of the business.
Thank you so much, Mats, for walking us through that. Katarina, I'll come back to you with a question, which is that you're a smaller, purpose-driven company, and how is your transition plan different from a larger, transforming company?
I think in many ways, because we have different rules of play. So on one hand, it's easier for us. We're agile, we're small, we have all our data. On the other hand, it's more difficult and challenging because we don't really have the resources. It was a really good help to have you at Exponential Roadmap helping us and guiding us through the process, because it's also about, even though we have really brilliant people and dogs at the office, it's about breaking down processes, routines, and demands that are originally meant for large corporates, and to make them feasible for a small scale-up or startup like us to actually work with. So that is one thing. And then I think, we're 100 people. Management team and board is just a phone call or a text message away, so it's easy to get the engagement and stakeholder engagement. On the other hand, we're still financed by investors. We also need to have our investors, that some of them are in the board and they need to be on it. And we also need to look forward, because we're going to be around soon, and looking at what kind of investors do we need. Can we do a reverse due diligence on those that we want to have on board to make this happen, and to possibly have a network effect in that direction too. So it goes many ways, I think, both easier and harder.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing the challenges of scaling up and maintaining your mission and your ability to work collaboratively across your business. Just a reminder, if you're watching on the live stream, you can submit questions to our panel. So just feel free to do that, and I'll receive them on my trusty iPad here to ask to our panel. So I'll come to you, Lars, with a question for H2 Green Steel about how are you managing this paradox between scaling your business and minimizing your emissions?
It's an interesting paradox. We're also this startup, sometimes I say on steroids, because we are working with so much capital. But our scaling up is more important than us being more efficient from a carbon perspective, but it's highly driven by our customers, which is super important for us. Financially important for us, of course, but also mentally important. So we have the pleasure to work with all these large European manufacturers of automotives and white goods and construction and stuff like that, like Mercedes-Benz and Volvo and Scania. So that is a true driver for us in our scale-up. So what we try to do now is that we have built 3 platforms in our company. It's the hydrogen platform, which we will use in our northern Sweden case ourselves. We will produce the hydrogen for ourselves. But that can also be scaled into other usages in other hard-to-abate industries like cement or aluminium and things like that. So we want to start and leverage our hydrogen knowledge. Second platform is our ability to create green iron, direct reduced iron based on hydrogen instead of coking coal that we've been doing steel for 1,000 years. That can actually be a super important scale up and also transition driver for the steel industry, because in all geographies you cannot produce steel as we are doing because of the lack of renewable energy. So then you can actually keep your assets except for your blast furnace and use our green iron and produce the steel to your customers. And then we have the green steel platform that we actually use to showcase that this works and to drive the transition. We have already started now. We have a lot of our focus on Boden, which is our blueprint in northern Sweden, but we have already now started to kind of ring fence a number of other locations. So we are looking at locations here in North America, both in Canada and the US. We're looking at locations in South America, and we're looking at locations in Southern Europe, in Portugal, where we can find the similar conditions, starting, once again, with ability to have renewable energy. It's not everywhere in the world, but we can find it in these locations. So while we're building our blueprint, while we're doing our lessons learned, while we're doing our mistakes, and while we're pushing this in northern Sweden, we are also planning to scale this up in other locations. And coming back to where I started, the customers want us to do that. The policy makers want us to do that. But here in the US, make sure that your policy makers are also pushing this harder, because I think they do in Europe in a good way. So we get help from our customers, we get help from our policy makers, and we have the drive from the capital market, who wants to invest in this, who gives us a fair valuation, who gives us low interest rates. And this entire ecosystem is kind of helping us to make this work.
Thank you so much, Lars. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. So if you want to put your hand up if you have a question, we have someone with a microphone coming around. Thank you so much. I think we'll just wait until we get the microphone. Thank you.
A question for Mats. I know you have an enormous supplier base. Can you tell us a little bit of what you were talking about, of decarbonizing your supply chain?
Sure. Thank you, Pelle. It sounds like it was scripted, but in fact, we haven't met until this morning for like 5 years or so. So we worked together a long time ago. But anyway, supply chain. Yeah, supply chain is tricky. We have 24,500 suppliers, approximately. So it's a massive undertaking to do that. So the way that we have done it is the same way as when I said we focused on energy. We took sort of a life cycle assessment approach and looked on where do we have our hotspots in the supply chain, where do we have the emissions. So looking at sort of a mobile base station, a large part of that is aluminum. And then we have printed circuit boards and the integrated circuits, and in that order, and then transport comes on fourth place. So looking at that, then that narrows down to about 150 suppliers, if we include strategic 350. And then we started working with them. That's sort of a number of suppliers that we can work with, 350. So that, and then we said, realizing based on the history with code of conduct and so on, that it's not so easy for suppliers to do this. So we really need to provide requirements. You can put requirements on your suppliers, but if you don't help them to meet the requirements, it will not happen anyway. So that's, I mean, and we will get back to that in the playbook discussion, because that's sort of the background to the whole thing. And providing the playbook and the Supply Chain Leaders Initiative together with Exponential Roadmap, we can then put free training, free tools, free everything for the suppliers to go in and use by themselves. And So that's how we address the rest, in a way. The 24,150 that is left. So they get sort of free tools, and we put the same requirements on them, but that's help to self-help in a way. And then we do that together with other leading companies, and in that way, they get the same requirements from many sources. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. I believe you were the second hand up, so I'll go for you at the back.
What would you folks like to see members of the general public doing to support and encourage, for example, the customers of Ericsson to make use of what you can make available? Seems like mostly members of the general public don't know very much about what corporations are treating decarbonization seriously, who are not. So love to get thoughts about the general public.
I can start, actually, if that is okay.
Yeah.
I think the general public is the key, personally. First, as consumers, because in the end of each value chain, there's a consumer. And during the transition, prices will go up. So you will actually have to consume a little bit less with the money you have to be able to support transition. As individuals, we're also the voters, coming back to pushing demands, giving the support to policymakers to do the necessary policy making and decisions that you need. So we, the individuals, are key to help the financial market and the industry and everything like that. So I think it's super important. And what we should do then is probably consume a little bit less, all of us. That's a tough message. But then, thanks. But then also choose smarter products that are actually first taking care of less consumption, car using less energy when driving, or a phone that is using that, or a system like that. But then of course, also be prepared to choose that and pay a little extra, i.e. consume less.
Well, can I just add one thing? Don't put limits on your music or your taking pictures. I mean, the digital transition that we have managed to do, taking away digital cameras, taking away all the films, taking away all the CDs, taking away all the material flow through digitalization, can in fact help us consume things without having an impact. And that is sort of the decoupling of emissions from the consumption and the growth. So I think that's another reason why I think the digital solutions are so important, because I mean, in the past, you couldn't do the same things. How many travel with an alarm watch? How many of you have a watch even? I have, because I got it before I got my phone. But I mean, how many use their phone to open the doors in their apartment and so on? I mean, you use it for so many different things, and it's one device. And the carbon footprint of a smartphone is about 50 kilos per year if you use it for 3 years. If you use it for 5 years, it's less. And that includes the network. It's almost nothing completely. So I think you should not think about it like that. If we can drive digitalization and use our technology in a smart way, we can in fact have growth at the same time as we sort of reduce the materials flow and materials use. So I agree with you. On materials consumption, we need to think in a different way, but how we can use other ways of consuming things is still open.
Thank you so much. We have time for one very small question. Oh. I believe you had your hand up first, so I'll go with you. Thank you. Sorry.
I don't know if it's a small one. Thank you so much for the music. I'm head of sustainability at Spotify, so that's music to my ears, saying not that you shouldn't cap your music. I had a question kind of building on the growth question, especially for like the impact, kind of the impact tech companies, but maybe also for Ericsson, that you see when you have like a positive impact built into your business model, how do you weigh that kind of the growth towards actually kind of limiting your emissions, if you see what I mean? Because I say like your company's growing would actually have a positive impact on the world, but it would also mean more emissions. How do you think about that?
We think about that all the time, because that's how we grow. I mean, we're a purpose-driven company. Our purpose is to actually create a positive impact, empower many. We reach 700 100 million plus end users today. However, we don't know if they change their behavior. And we can't measure, we can't follow up that. We can do some surveys and stuff, but we could, and we aim to develop our ability to do that in collaboration with our clients. But that is one thing, to understand and get data on what we actually contribute to through our end users. And then we work very much within the company. So how can we work with sales? How can we work with being in places like this to both create advocacy on climate change in nature and our ambition without traveling as much as we do, for example. But then also work very much with the supply chain. And yeah, try to find new products, new digital products, new experiences. Also going back to what I know that Spotify has done, and going back to the previous question a bit, to try to help to envision that positive future that we want to have, not like decarbonized, very boring future, because we all want to live and thrive in something that is nice as individuals, people, citizens, consumers, what have you. So I think that is also an important message that we need to put into that equation.
Did you want to come in on that?
If we have time.
Very briefly,
Very
yes.
briefly. I think we look at sustainability as a business case, actually. So sometimes you have to take a cost, sometimes you have to take an investment. Our investment now is the threshold to go, all the CO2 that we actually emit until we get back to net zero. But we get so much out of it on the saving side. And for us, probably the most important stuff, and that's why I talk about us enabling and not disrupting, it's actually that we show the industry that this could work. And that is kind of the big like payback on our business case when it comes to CO2. Because we have seen so many announcements since we and our friends Hybrid, who is doing the same thing in Sweden, we have seen so many announcements on green steel across the industry. And this is also saying something about back to, it's broader than CO2 also. Sometimes you have to take a cost in local environment to get a saving or an impact in another way, but we have to always minimize the cost and maximize the outcome.
Thank you. And very brief concluding thoughts from Johan before I move to the second part of the debate.
Yeah, I would say I was a bit skeptical to the idea of transition plans like 1 year ago, but I'm really super excited. I think it's incredibly important. It will be the tool that actually will make companies have to integrate climate nature as part of their business strategy on all functions. There is no other way to set a transition plan. That's what we realized. It's absolutely impossible. I think it will be a shock for a number of companies. It will be a shock. As Mats said, it will take several years, you see. It was really, really impossible to put together a transition plan unless you have done that work, started previously. What we will do now, I think, is to consolidate a lot of learnings with sessions with the Secretary General, Race to Zero, and all the companies, and see how can we see this as a first step, but also work together with peer organizations, you know, like Race to Zero and others, to see can we help to develop best practices in terms of transition plans and good tools for alignment. There are a couple of points I like to mention. Of course, the key part which Secretary General is focusing on is phasing out coal, phasing out oil in your value chains. So we further highlight that we need to eliminate fossil from all the leading companies' value chains stringently as quickly as ever possible. Yeah, that is important, and we will push that very hard. But there are the other aspects. We need to influence also that the climate solutions part, which is the third pillar we'll talk about, which is really the upscaling of the solutions. It's not just about the down curves, it's about the up curves. That's one thing. I think the digitalization, as you mentioned, we need to get that into the equation as well, to say, well, in order to push these solutions faster, we need to really now apply digitalization. And also I want to mention SMEs as well. We start to look at, can we actually provide some tools for SMEs to make really super simplified transition plans? And we have the SME Climate Hub, as you know, together with Women Business and Race to Zero. So SMEs as well, we like to have into the picture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic panel. We'll say a big thank you to Katarina and to Lars, and we'll invite actually up Jenny and Ramiro. But first, I promised you a stretch break, so if you're able to, we can just stand up and stretch a little bit and look at the sun, and then we'll sit back down in about a minute or so. You can smile at your neighbor, introduce yourself if it's in less than a minute. If you want to grab your coffees and take a seat, please. We're going to have you come sit back down. Yeah. Okay, thanks. I'm going to go into the crowd. Can we start, Ryan? Hi, sorry, if I could get you to start to sit down again. Please. Okay, sure. Yeah, sorry, if I could get you to sit down. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much, and sorry to cut your coffee break short. We just have a lot to get through in the second part of the session. Thank you so much. I hope you stretched. I hope you managed to introduce yourself to someone. And thank you so much for being back on time for the second part of the session, which will all be focused on the 1.5 Business Playbook. So this is going to be a little bit Oprah, but there should be one on or under your seat at the moment. So you can pull it up and have a look at this fantastic update to the 1.5 Business Playbook. Very excited to present the second part of the session, which is entirely focused on the playbook. And with that, I'll hand over to Johan and Mats to talk through why the update and what's new.
Thank you very much. So we're very happy, we're very proud to launch the 3.0 version of the Business Playbook, which has been, a very important journey since more than 3 years. The Exponential Roadmap, just to explain who we are, we bring together innovators, transformers, and disruptors, taking action in line with the 1.5 ambition, with a mission to halve emissions by 2030 through exponential climate action and solutions. And we are one of the accredited partners of UN Race to Zero. We work really closely with Race to Zero. And here are some of the companies we work with. We only onboard the absolute leading companies in the world, and develop best practices and also support them in developing transition plans and different type of tools, with the idea of sharing all that knowledge to every company in the world openly, which is extremely important, because even if you have these frontline companies, they can't achieve net zero on their own. It doesn't really matter if you don't do it together with your value chain or the other companies. We either succeed together or we fail together. So we have to build everything on sharing and radical collaboration. So that is part of what we're doing. And today we're launching the 1.5 playbook. And what is the strength? Well, I would say there are at least 50, 80 people, experts who have been involved over 3 years' time, both from companies, from science and so on. And it's supported by companies with a combined revenue of about $1 trillion. So that is a strength, as far as I see it, of the playbook. Yeah, this was the launch last year of the last year's version, as you can see here. I think Mats is on here as well, and Johan Rockström and some others. Okay, let's see if we can. Okay, so just the key points. This was actually when we launched it at World Economic Forum together with Johan and Christiana, the first version. And the idea was really to make this handbook for CEOs, managers, and employees to align the company with the 1.5 ambition. And it is grounded in the latest science. So we have scientists as part of the development. And another key point is focus on simplicity and speed. You know, keep it short, keep it absolutely precise. And the simplicity is really important for CEOs and others, not to overcomplicate things. Keep it as short as ever possible. Yeah, I talked about the experts, and it builds on the 4-pillar framework, which I'll come into. But actually, when we kicked it off, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about the idea and how it came up together at the 2018, I think, was it?
Yeah, so thank you, Johan. And back to what we talked about earlier on supply chain. We were at the Exponential Climate Action Summit in San Francisco that was organized in San Francisco because Governor Brown said that Trump is going out of the Paris Agreement, but we are still in. So a lot of states, a lot of cities in US said we are still in. And then they organized an event where no government leaders or politicians from government level were allowed. It was only sort of cities and regions and others that were there, and industry for sure. And it was a fantastic moment because Christiana Figueres, who led the Paris Agreement negotiations from the UN side, and Johan Rockström, who is a leading science, presented the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, or the Exponential Roadmap Report, which was sort of a description of how we can scale existing solutions and meet the 1.5 degree target. Sort of the content of that report is more or less the same as the UNFCCC report or the IPCC report that came out on the solutions last year. So they could have saved 3 years by using our report instead, because it's more or less the same solutions and the same scaling. But when sitting there in the press conference, we said that it's always the same companies. I mean, it's the Unilevers, it's the Microsoft, it's the Googles, and the company. We are the same companies that sit here every time. It's like 500 companies, maybe 1,000 companies that are here going to all these conferences, saying the same things. How do we get everybody else on board? And that was the idea of the playbook. So we have to make it dead simple to do right. That was one thing. And the other thing was what I talked about supply chain. We can put requirements on our suppliers, but we can also inspire our customers to work with us. So, and then we have to sort of work together with the leading companies, these ones, and sort of spread this fast. So I think that is sort of, the idea came up after the press conference, how do we get more people to take action? And the other part I would say about the Exponential Roadmap that is unique. I was on the opening ceremony of the Climate Week on Sunday afternoon, and the UNFCCC head said that the time of pledges is over. We don't need more pledges. And that's exactly what we said already in 2018. I said, I refuse to do pledges. We will sort of, you have to qualify yourself to be part of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. It's not about sort of doing a pledge and promising something. You have to qualify to be there. And in fact, several companies have sort of not made that mark. So I think that's, I mean, it should be something that you aspire to be part of, where you show your action. So I think that is also where the playbook comes in to guide you to get there.
Yeah, that's right. So thanks for that, Mats. We, as we said, we sort of grounded, the initiative is grounded in the carbon law, which was published in 2017 by our co-chair, Johan Rockström, and other scientists from Potsdam and otherwise. basically stating that we need about to halve emissions every decade. And that's a way to explain the 1.5 trajectory in a way that people understand it. So it's an approximation, but it's really, really important. At the same time, we need to protect nature and scale the carbon sinks, which is not visible here, just to be clear on that. So that has been the guiding principle when we also built the playbook, just to be clear on that. Unfortunately, we are not doing our job, as you can see, in terms of the actual emissions, due to several reasons that we don't have the critical mass and so on. But that's our absolute mission, to bend this curve, to do our utmost, what we can do as individuals, as companies, to push the economy in a new direction. We all know that. We know we have that mission. In the playbook, you can also see how we really explain how you can actually set a plan, how to both reduce your scope. This is just an example, scope 1, 2, 3, and also what net zero is, the current latest definition, how much you need to reduce, and how you need to outbalance that to be able to claim net zero by what we call like-for-like removals at the end of the day. But we also, it's really important, we encourage all companies to invest in protection of nature and in building new technologies on the road down to net zero. But do not call it offsets. Offset is off the table, and that terminology we don't apply anymore because it's very much associated with greenwashing. So the key point is it's separate buckets, but you can't trade them against each other. And I think that is being established now, so we also contributed to get that in place. Okay, the 4-pillar, what is the core of the playbook, the 4-pillar framework? And you might say, well, how does it relate to the GHG protocol, which is we're following down to detail, of course, but that is a protocol for reporting. This is a strategic framework. That is a big difference of a strategic framework to drive your business, because we come from the business side initially. So it's basically about cutting your own emissions, scope 1 and 2. What is that? Well, of course, your processes, your offices, your own vehicles, and so on. And many companies, this might represent 1 or 2% even. I'm not sure with Ericsson, a few percent. Half a percent. It's still very important to keep track of your backyard and in order to be credible in the other work. So even if you're a climate solutions companies, you need to take care of your own emissions, reduce them, implement the best practices. But then, of course, the second part is the value chain emissions. And that is, of course, as Mats said, a much higher challenge. That's the upstream emissions, we know that, you know, the materials, the transportation, and so on. And it's a downstream emission, which is the usage of the products as well, which all companies can influence. So there is a lot of practices that we develop in terms of being able to halve emissions, you know, within 10 years, which should be viable, but it's a big challenge for companies. And then we talk about the 3rd pillar, which we now renamed as well, to provide and scale solutions or climate solutions. We will have a particular session on that later today. Together with Oxford Net Zero, we're developing a climate solutions framework. So it should be able for companies to identify if you have climate solutions according to framework, and also be able to set targets, which is basically scaling the up curves. So we're very excited about that. We will take in the input and develop that in collaboration with other organizations. And the 4th pillar, what is that? Well, that is basically what you do as a company beyond your value chain. We'll talk about that. Influencing policy, it could be to support your employees taking climate action, but it could also be to invest in protecting nature. So these are basically the 4-pillar framework, which is sort of the core of the playbook. And wrap up quickly. I would also like to say that we are developing specific action guides which links to the playbook. Some of them, strategic, we are doing on our own. We had a session on the Green in Cash guide, supplier action guide. We're also working with WBCSD and others who built up different action guides. We can actually link each individual action to specific best practice guides. We're also applying the playbook to our climate performance review. So when we review and assess companies, we use the playbook framework to assess and benchmark companies. So that is how it works. Okay, what is new in this playbook? We keep the stability. It's really important to keep the stability in the playbook, not to change anything unless it's required. So the first thing is integrating all the latest key standards, like the Race to Zero 3.0, HLEG, CSRD, and so on. We have the experts to ensure that a company shouldn't need to go to 10 or 50 different sources that can apply the playbook. So that's one thing. Transition plans, we talked about that, all the actions. We're also starting to work on key performance indicators, best practice in key performance indicators. So there's a particular part of that, which is also breaking some new ground, and solutions. So that's basically, yeah, these are example of, I won't go into that, of KPIs, example KPIs, which companies can set, which are forward-looking, not lagging KPIs. So I'll stop there, and I think we'll hand over to Mats to talk a little bit. Maybe I'll take it to you first.
Oh, yes, actually, we'll go to Ramiro first.
Yeah,
Ramiro, you're the campaigns director of the Climate Champions team. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Race to Zero and how you work with ERI?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, and thanks for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here on the launch of the new playbook. I will say that Race to Zero, which was launched in June 2020, in the middle of the global pandemic, it was launched with the same purpose that you were mentioning, about how we bring others into this sort of process. And I have to say that in less than three years, we've seen the engagement of companies growing from a couple of hundreds that were announced at the 2019 Climate Summit towards over 12,000 members that we have today in the campaign, committing to be net zero by 2050 and halving emissions by 2030 collectively. Today, in this group, we have 1/3 of the Fortune 500 largest companies. We've got 40% of the global assets under management, and we've got 12% of the global populations between cities and regions working on this. So I think we can see how we really move from a small club of a few sort of companies always coming together to really mainstreaming net zero and making it the new standard for corporates, cities, and regions working on climate. And I think that is very important. And that happened through pledges. That happens because companies set up pledges, targets, and plans and actions. And I think that is very good, and we need to celebrate and recognize that, acknowledging that now it is time to translate that into the actions, into the transition plans, into the way forward. And that is the process how we do that. In the Race to Zero, we have 26 partners today working with us. So we bring all these partners together and work on that. And I do have to say that the spirit of the race that we apply for companies and cities to accelerate the transition to net zero, it also applies for the partners. It is a race about where the partners are in this progress towards Race to Zero. And by far, Exponential Roadmap Initiative, it is one of the leading members on that race within the campaigns and the partners. They're always sort of pushing us on the way forward on the frontiers, you know, with the playbook in the past, engaging and connecting with the SME Climate Hub and sort of supporting the big companies to engage the SMEs and the companies there. And we are always working together, identifying what is the next frontier of what is needed. Transition plans, it is a critical part into that. So I think that is the way we aim to work forward, and the collaboration with Exponential Roadmap Initiative on pushing and being upfront on this race towards net zero.
Thank you so much, Ramiro. I'll hand over to Jenny now, and we'll come back to you a little bit later, Ramiro. Jenny, could you, just a reminder, Jenny is the Global Head of Public Affairs and Partnerships at Scania. Could you introduce what Scania is and also how you are taking your climate strategy across these 4 pillars? Thank you so much.
Of course. So thank you very much for having me, and also that we are one of the companies that actually is part of the Exponential Roadmap. Scania is a world-leading truck and bus manufacturer. So we are present in 100 countries around the globe. Actually, the only region we're not present in with our trucks and buses is North America, but we are part of the Traton Group owned by Volkswagen. So we have a sister company called Navistar that is actually covering North America for us. So, but anyways, I mean, since many, many years, the purpose of Scania is to drive the shift towards a sustainable transport system. We acknowledge that we are part of the problem, so we need to be part of the solution. And that has been at core for Scania for the last couple of years, or 10 years at least. So that is kind of the first thing. And I mean, this is kind of what we are in right now, is kind of a disruptive transformation comparable with when we went from horse and carriage to combustion engine. So it's a leap of faith. I mean, we're in this, and we have, as our CEO says, put our company at stake here. I mean, we are investing so heavily in this transition, but we can't do this alone. It's a totally different environment, selling a diesel truck and actually scaling up with zero-emission vehicles. So do you want me to go through the pillars now, or yeah? So we're doing a lot, and also as you've been into, I mean, the first pillar, of course, the scope 1 and 2, we were actually also the first industry within our, or the first company within our industry to get science-based targets approved already back in 2020. So the first pillar is the easy one, as that is kind of the emissions that we can control, of course, and also not accounting for that much emissions because they come later. But nevertheless, as you also were into, it makes a great, I mean, you have to do that anyways in order to be credible. So we have actually all our industrial facilities now, they run on fossil-free electricity. We have 10 production facilities around the world. So, and the last one was in Argentina, now run on pure wind energy, which is very good. And that also, I mean, that's 450,000 megawatt hours annually, still something. We also installed solar panels on all our facilities in Södertälje. Trying to do things there, working with energy efficiency, of course, which is also super important. And when we made calculations, we actually corresponding to the energy efficiency measures that we did, corresponding to 47,000 square meters of solar panels with a much shorter return of investment. So that is kind of the first pillar. The second one is then, of course, the supply chain and when our products are in use. And that is, of course, much harder for us to control. But what we did as of this year, we have set goals to decarbonize our supply chains in the 4 hotspots that is more important for us, or that accounts for more than 80% of our emissions. And those are, of course, batteries, where we work with the Swedish battery cell producer Northvolt. It's steel. We have one of our partners here. We actually put our first order this year on H2 Green Steel. I'm very happy for that. It's aluminium, of course, and it's cast iron. And it's effective starting actually September this year that we put these firm requirements on these suppliers. And it's just, I mean, it's just starting. Will be the starting point of that. So, yeah. And then, of course, I mean, when our products are in use, so we work a lot with discussions and partners with our customers and also with our customer's customer. And it's not, I mean, there's no one silver bullet. We're talking a lot here this week about electrification of society, electrification of our industry, and that is super important. But we also need to work here and now with solutions like biofuels and biomethane, etc., to get kind of our science-based targets to fulfill those. But going into then pillar 3, that is the whole electrification journey that Scania is now in, and that is kind of the disruptive transition that we're in the midst of. And we are investing so heavily in this. We just inaugurated our battery assembly in Södertälje. It's 1.5 billion Swedish kroner. I won't do the conversion into dollars now, but because the kroner is so weak at the moment. But anyway, a huge investment. And we have the ambition for Scania, as we said at the moment, is to have 50% of our sales volume, 2030, zero-emission vehicles, which for Scania means battery electric vehicles. That is kind of the technology track that we chose. But in order for us to do this, we need the whole ecosystem to work with us. So it's enabling conditions, not only the supply chain, which is of course important, but it's also having the charging infrastructure in place, having the green electricity there, having the kind of TCO, the total cost of operations for the customers, to make it a good business case to buy these electric trucks. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said. I can also say that half of our actually spending on R&D now goes into electrification. And more than half of our engineering staff is now into software engineering and not the kind of traditional mechanical engineering that it used to be. So we are working so hard on this, and that is why I say it's kind of a leap of faith here. So it's, I mean, talking about credibility, I got that question also yesterday. I mean, just look at all the investments we do. It's kind of a do or die thing for Scania, I would say. So going into the pillar 4 then, and I have a long list I was provided with all my colleagues, so you have to say this and you have to say this. So we do, I mean, internally we have a climate day where an hour every year at Climate Day, we are actually educating or having conversations with all our employees, 57,000 employees around the world, on climate issues, depending from year to year a little bit the topic. But anyways, and we inspired our owner, Volkswagen, to do the same, and they have 600,000 employees that does this, and that's kind of impressive. That's the kind of internal part. Then we have a huge range of external partnerships. I myself, I'm responsible for governmental relations. We do that in Sweden, of course, trying to influence the Swedish government, as Sweden is important, not as a market, but that's kind of our home base, where we kind of demonstrate and implement the first solutions, trying to show to the world that if we can electrify a super heavy truck in Arctic conditions up in the north, we can do it anywhere. We do it on a European level. We're part of the CEO Alliance, which is a CEO Alliance, obviously, consisting of 12 companies, where actually also H2 Green Steel is one part. Being a dialogue partner to the European politicians and trying to say to them, actually, we're sending a message to Ursula von der Leyen for her speech to the EU last week, saying that don't lower the ambitions. These ambitions are super important for us because that is kind of the leading star, also guiding us to step up. Because what we feel right now is that industry is actually leading. Politicians are a little bit lacking behind. And and then we have a lot. We have a joint venture together with Volvo and Daimler on charging infrastructure. So we're also investing in these enabling conditions that we need because we don't really trust that the politicians will do what they need to do in order for us to do this. So that is also one thing. We have a Pathways Coalition where you and I meet in the kind of the transport value chain, because that is another thing that we need to do this together with our customers, the transporters, but also their customers, the transport buyers. So we need IKEA and H&M and all the transport buyers also to put firm requirements on of green transports. So this is the whole kind of chain of things that we need to do.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that amazing climate action across the 4 pillars. I want to stay on the 4th pillar and come back to you, Ramiro. And you mentioned that Race to Zero has 26 partners. I'd like to hear how we can scale the climate action across these 4 pillars, across Race to Zero's different partners and organizations.
Absolutely, and I have to say, I love the structure of the 4 pillars because of the simplicity they provide and the clarity to all the partners. Within Race to Zero criteria, we use the concept of the 5 Ps, the proceed, publish, pledge, and and plan. Sorry about that. And we just recently aligned the 5P, which is persuade, which is align your policy and alignment with your climate goals and targets. And what you are telling is just what we need right now. As you said, the leaders have been pioneering there, and now it is time to have the right policy and regulations in place in different places. So we need to have all this community that start pledging, that now is moving into transition plans and delivering action, doing the right sort of policy and advocacy work to get regulation in place to make this mandatory and level the playing field for all. And that's where the collaboration between the Race to Zero members and partners and the alignment, the strategy becomes really relevant. That's an area where we need collaboration very much on board, and we're having afternoon today, sort of what we're calling a road to regulation process within all the Race to Zero partners and members. But I do have to say that I think if there is one area where we need the support and the strong engagement from ERI, it is on the 3rd solution. Because I do think you frame it in a very right way. This is a matter of a dire leave thing for companies. We are facing an existential threat. We need exponential changes in the way forward. So this is what we need. We need to find the new solutions. And if you, as corporate, really be open to define what is your business and how you are contributing to the solution. If you're not, change. You need to transform yourself. And we need to get this narrative into that space there. Also, the other element that I do think it is very much needed and critical, it is, although all the progress that we've seen in the campaign and most were on net zero, is still very much, for now, a sort of a northern-driven process. You know, most of the members in Race to Zero, they're still part of the developed world in many areas. And we are starting to have requests from many different regions about how we can accelerate and the engagement and support them on their transition for decarbonization. And that is an area where I think we can also work on that. I would start with translating the playbook into other languages and designing a strategy, and the SME Climate Hub can be very helpful on that, to connecting with corporates and businesses in developing regions so they can get on board into this transition as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Ramiro. That's a very important point about applicability and access. Jana, I'll just, since Ramiro mentioned the Pillar 3, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about climate solutions and scaling up climate solutions and what ERI is doing on this work.
Yeah, and as I said, we will have a particular very exciting session today, which we will really focus in on climate solutions. But as I said in the beginning, we will not succeed to cut emissions unless we scale up the solutions, because it's all about shifting out the old economy so we can actually provide services to people which are at least as good or better. So it's basically impossible to cut emissions unless we will cut the complete economy. So therefore, we need now this laser focus on scaling up the solutions. And some of the solutions have, as far as we see it, passed the tipping point. We can discuss if that's around 10-15%, which is electrical vehicles and it's renewable energy. They're scaling exponentially, and they will have huge, major impact soon on the fossil industry. We are at the beginning of the end of the fossil industry. Absolutely sure about that. We haven't seen that yet. That will happen. But we also have a number of solutions which hasn't passed that tipping point. You know, like for example, steel is in an early phase. It's just few percent. So it's really critical to get the curve up as quickly as ever possible, because, you know, about the exponentials, it's perceived as very, very slow in the beginning. Nothing is happening. And then suddenly you reach a point where it's just taking off. Just think about the iPhone. It works normally for most solutions. Apart from that, we have so much resistance in the system that trying to push back the solutions, which can come from government, from fossil subsidies, and from the fossil industry, trying to hold back the new solutions. It's really important that we rally together among the leaders to accelerate the solutions and make it a race to the top for companies. You know, it's about winning the next economy, but also for countries as well should be the next step. How we look upon climate solutions, well, come back to that later on. You can see it in the playbook. It's a sort of framework that we have tested for 2 years. It's not new. We tested it practically. So now we're pulling it together with Oxford Net Zero, and to review it. So to qualify as a climate solution, if you provide a product or service, we basically relate to this carbon law. It should at least remove or avoid 50% compared to business as usual, at least, but preferably more, of course, 90%. And for these solutions, it's important not to apply absolute targets, but intensity targets. So if you have a company like Scania, for example, you should divide it in 2 buckets. You know, you have your traditional business where you need to cut your emissions according to absolute emission curves. And you have your climate solutions where you should preferably apply intensity targets. It's basically 2 buckets, so you are able to grow that business.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We have a few minutes remaining for a question from the audience. Oh, you had your hand up first. I'll go for you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, panelists. I work in international standards, so I am a bit biased, but I'm curious to your point, Johan, earlier about we are beyond target setting and pledges, which is so true. We have formal standards now for target setting and emissions reporting, namely SBTI and ISSB. But I'm curious what you're doing to connect these high ambition, high integrity frameworks and guidelines to the formal international standards system. I saw that the ISO Net Zero guidelines, for example, are referenced in here. I know several of you contributed to that, so thank you. But this sort of framework is crucial to driving, again, that international standard system. So would love to hear what you're doing to connect to ISO and similar frameworks.
Yeah, we've been part of, through some of our research fellows, part of the ISO standardization of net zeros. We have influenced that. We've been very, very active in, well, Race to Zero is not the standard. Yeah, exactly, it's not the precise standard, but the framework for Race to Zero 3.0, we worked over 2 years to influence that. So from our, when it comes to climate solutions, it's very fragmented right now. There are a couple of different concepts. So I guess our approach there is to launch something which is basically following the Oxford conveyor model, I think, basically where we can...
Conveyor belt model, right?
Yeah, exactly, from Tom Hale. That we pilot something, we gather experiences, and then we try to influence and bring it to the standards in a second and third stage without trying to avoid fragmentation. But I think in the beginning, we need to test some different concepts. We need to test them practically. So that is our thinking. So of course, we want to bring it into the standards, but we also need the pre-standards, and then try to influence to as far extent as possible.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Johan. Do a very quick question. Yep.
Yes, hi. My name is Gilad from Cora Sustainability, and you mentioned earlier that you think we should be offsetting should not be used. You were talking about the greenwashing. So what do you think about carbon credits? What do you think about the pricing? Do you think that increasing the pricing of carbon will change the economy and help companies like the steel company to become much more realistic in terms of competition?
What I meant before is that we think the term offset, that you can actually, instead of cutting emissions, you can buy credits. That is fundamentally wrong. That is that you need to cut your emissions, you need to follow, you need to have a net zero and halving target, and you need to take full responsibility for your emissions. But at the same time, we should encourage companies to actually invest, because we really need to grow the investment in protection of nature and in, also the energy transformation and scaling up the carbon removal and storage technologies at the same time. But it's an area which is developed. So it's a little bit, the problem right now is that because there has been so much criticism, that there's a risk, of course, that companies invest much less in protection of nature. And we need to scale up at the same time. So that's unfortunate.
Thanks, Johan. I'm going to hand over to Ramiro, and I'm going to ask Mats and Jenny to think of one sentence closing for just the audience to take away. Ramiro.
Briefly reacting on the carbon credits element, because I do think we need to acknowledge we need to reduce our emissions, and at the same time we need to restore nature and be able to capture emissions in a massive way. And that's where carbon credits have a role to play. High integrity, high price carbon credits, they have a role to play. What it makes the challenge it is when people try to justify not reducing their emissions by buying credits. But we need to do both. Reduce our emissions and restore nature in 7 years massively. So
Thank you, Ramiro.
All is needed.
Thank you for that call to action. Mats, I'm going to hand off to you for one sentence brief closing.
I think, as I said, we really need to get much more people to move from pledges to action. I think that is the key for everyone. We cannot continue to pledge.
Thank you. And Jenny, final word to you.
So much nice things has been said here, but I think we need really brave politicians, and also I think that partnerships is actually crucial. That's the new leadership.
Thank you so much. So just a reminder, if you're watching this live streamed The recording will be available on the Solutions House YouTube channel. And if you're sharing anything about the session, you can use the hashtags SolutionsHouse2023 and Climate Week NYC. We have another session starting promptly, so we'll have to do a quick changeover, but just another thank you so much to our panelists.